Today's date is Monday, February 10th, 2025. My name is Eric Thompson, and I'm interviewing Reggie McGill as part of research with the University of Central Florida's Riches Project in cooperation with the City of Orlando's Parramore Speaks project. This interview is being conducted at City Hall in Orlando, Florida, and Mr. McGill has agreed to allow this interview to be recorded. Mr. McGill, could you start off by telling me your full name?
Reginald Bernard McGill.
Thank you. And can you tell me about your childhood and where you grew up?
Certainly. I'm a native of Orlando. I was born in Parramore over 60 years ago and have spent all of my life, with the exception of doing some undergraduate work in Tampa at the University of South Florida. Once I graduated, I came back to Orlando, and that's where I started my career in banking and public service.
And when did your family first come to Orlando?
My mother was born in North Florida, and so she was in high school when they made the transition to Orlando. And so that would be well over 75, 80 years ago.
And did they move directly to Parramore? Is that when they arrived in the Parramore area?
Yes, sir, they did.
And so let's talk about your family. What did your parents do for a living?
Certainly. My father was in the military, and once he became a civilian, he still worked with McCoy Air Force Base. And my mother was with the Orange County Public Schools as a school bookkeeper. Both of them retired and enjoyed life after work. Unfortunately, both of them have made their transition now.
And how about your grandparents? Were they around in the area as well?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so proud of my grandparents, as I am of my parents. But my grandparents owned and operated a convenience store. It was called Linton's Groceries. Their names were Dan and Pearl Linton. And I remember my first job I ever had was really working with them, stocking shelves and working the cash register. And that was at South, I think their address is 610 South Division Street. Unfortunately, that building is now gone, and the building was torn down with a number of buildings in that area for the East-West Expressway, the 408.
And can you share memories of your family's involvement in sort of business in the community when you were younger?
My grandmother probably was the pace setter. She was very, very involved with church work as well as within the community. And I can remember following her, accompanying her to various meetings in the community and also in our church. I'm very, very active with St. Mark in the church. And we have a tiered opportunity to serve and to make a contribution. And so I am now a member of the executive committee of the General Board of the African Baptist Episcopal Church, which is really an honor to serve at that level.
And how about siblings? Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have an older sister, Esther, who lives in Broward County. She's about 8 years older than I. And I'm happily married to Deborah Mitchell McGill. We will celebrate our 41st year of marriage. We met at the University of South Florida the first day of class. I was a transfer junior, she was a freshman.
And growing up in the area, do you remember any particular struggles or difficulties that your family faced in the community?
I can. Black on black crime was real. I can remember my grandparents being robbed. And you have to understand my grandfather, he is shorter than I, and I'm like 5'6". And so somebody came in to rob him, and he actually ran the man down Division Street and caught him. He was a young kid. So I can remember those days. As I was matriculating into high school, integration started. And so I had gone to Washington Shores and Carver Junior High, which is now Carver Middle School. I should back up. My first and second grade, I was at Phyllis Swiftly. My mother worked in a popcorn, and so I went to school with her. But then when we moved from Parramore into the Washington Shores area, I then enrolled at Washington Shores Elementary. However, my senior years where I was a student at Boone High School, there were 575 in my graduating class. 13 of us were black, and so that transition was challenging. But I had a very, very strong foundation. I knew who I was thanks to my parents and my village, my church family, my community. So I knew who I was, and so I was not intimidated when people were not as kind as it could have been or should have been. But we had teachers there who were very supportive, allowed me to grow and develop. I ran for class president. I didn't win, but just to be out there sharing a minority position was positive. And some of those friends that I made then, we are still friends now.
While we're on the subject of school, you already covered a couple of the questions I was going to ask about where you went to school, so thank you for getting us there naturally. But what was your favorite subject in school?
Probably, believe it or not, English. And I loved history. Math was not my strongest forte, nor was science. Though my wife is the one who became an English and journalism major. So it still kind of runs in the family.
And how about the teachers that you had? Are there any who stick out to you as particularly memorable?
My fifth grade teacher is still alive. She's in her 90s, Mrs. Constance. We call her Connie Rivers. She was my third grade teacher. My fifth grade teacher served me at Washington Shores Elementary. And I still keep in contact with her to this day. As I mentioned at Boone High School, it was Miss Ellie Kenyon, who was a white woman who was way above of her time. She was so inclusive, invited us to her home to eat her food and just be a part of her family. She has since transitioned, but I will never ever forget the time that she invested in me. I think I'm a better person now because of my contributions and interaction with her. All about community action, social justice, and community service.
And at that time, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do when you grew up?
Believe it or not, when I was in high school and transitioned to college, I really wanted to be an elected official. It was my goal to run for a city council. And a woman by the name of Mabel Butler, who was the first elected woman to the city council and the county commission, lived right down the street. Matter of fact, the street that my parents moved to in Washington Shores is now named after Mabel Butler, so I lived only a couple of blocks away from her. I still am in contact with her now. She's in her late 90s and she still drives.
And growing up, what were you doing in your spare time when you weren't in school?
I was very involved. As I mentioned, I was involved in the community. I can remember after I graduated and came back here, getting very involved in the Southwest Orlando JCs. I was a business major, so I was involved with the Central Florida Urban Bankers Association. Had an office in there and served as one of the founding members. Also, I pledged to fraternity in undergraduate, the same fraternity that Martin Luther King is a member of, Alpha Phi Alpha. I became very, very involved in the chapter here in college. I was a chapter president. So I do believe that we can make a difference in our own space and time and make life better, not only for us, but for the people that we call family, neighbors, and friends.
We'll shift gears a little bit towards sort of business in the community. You touched on it with your grandparents, son. We'll circle back to that. But what other kinds of businesses existed in the neighborhood while you were younger?
Oh, hair care was really big. You know, we call them quote unquote beauty parlors. We call them now hair designers. They were called beauticians back at the time, or barbers. So that was a major issue. One of my great aunts, my grandfather's sister on my father's side of the family, also was a seamstress, and so she had her own business making clothes for men and women. And many of her clientele were white individuals who would come into the neighborhood or would pick her up and take her to their home, and she would tailor the clothes, tailor-made for her clients. And so there's always been that entrepreneurial spirit in our family and being supportive of black business and small businesses.
To that about black businesses and small businesses, how do you feel those contribute to the community?
Oh, they make a difference. And I think there are still a needed value to this day. I think there is something to be said about shopping in your neighborhood. And a number of these small businesses allow persons to do just that. But I also can remember when I first started to make my transition from banking, and I became a financial planner, working for serving as a financial planner, wherein there were some clients who would drive 45 minutes. That was a Jewish man who had an extremely successful business. And so many of his clients would travel an hour and a half to do business with him. And it was also those kinds of relationships that helped me to hone my skills and recognize that sometimes we have to think outside the box if we really want to be successful.
So that's the business side of things. Let's look at the other side of it, from the labor side. What sort of work did the people of Parramore do?
It varied because Parramore, there was a middle class in Parramore, there was a working class in Parramore. I was really, really fortunate. I refer to my parents as working class individuals, but my father, who had gone to the military, came home and got a civilian job with the Air Force. And so he made more money than a lot of teachers and administrators. But he understood that education was the key, so he had two younger brothers, and he sent both of them to college. One became a principal, as well as a presiding elder in our church denomination, as well as a silent partner of a funeral home. He was chairman of the school board in Georgia where he lived. The county was small, and so he was the principal of the high school at a neighboring county. And so public service has always been the key. And I was just fortunate to have family who understood the importance of education. And so that was a key in my household. It was not if I was going to college, it was where was I going to college. And that was the same thing for my sister as well.
When you look at business and entrepreneurship in Parramore, how has it changed over time?
There's always been black-owned businesses and businesses that were owned by others. And when I say that, I can remember Hispanics having successful businesses. I can remember whites having successful businesses. And we would patron those businesses. And the flip side to it is they would hire some persons who lived in the community. I can remember the same uncle working at a convenience store, serving in the meat department. He would package the meats for persons who would make those purchases. And competition was real. I can remember, I mentioned my grandparents had a convenience store in one corner, and right down the street, Mr. and Mrs. Holloman had a convenience store as well. But even though they serviced sometimes the same clients, they really worked together. If they had run out of an item, they would refer them to go down the street to get the item. And so they really did work together.
I mentioned that I was going to have you do an activity for us. It's time for that.
You did say that.
So this is a map of Orlando. I've removed the community names, and I'd like you to draw on the map using whichever of these you like, what you define as Parramore. Draw its borders for us.
Interesting. Interesting. I see a number of places. I see up to Washington Shores. I see Holden Heights. I see Dimitri Homes. I am still looking. I see Washington Shores. I would say this portion of Robinson, Jefferson would be a part of Parramore. I think that the border would probably be Amelia, and that's where the A school is now located. And so this is Orange Blossom Trail, Church Street, Jackson Street, all of this would be Parramore. Long Street, Connolly, all of this would be Parramore. So I'm going to start here and go down to here and stop at Core Street. These are my recollections. Some may include Concord as well, and Arrington.
Thank you very much.
pleasure.
What challenges did you notice in the community, and how did the community respond to overcome them over time?
You have to understand that we didn't know we were poor. For a long time, I didn't know it because there was so much love. And I was fortunate. I had both parents in the home. My grandparents lived in the neighborhood. On my mother's side, my grandparents on my father's side, my grandmother's already transitioned before I was born. And I can remember my grandfather living with us until I was about 5 years old when he transitioned. But we took care of him. He got to the point where he could not walk, and so we took care of him. So we were so rich in support. The church played a major part in our development. Even though I was a member of the AME church, I had family that were members of the Church of God in Christ, the CME church, the Baptist church, and we all just worshiped together.
So you mentioned it a couple times, the role that the church played in community. Are there other organizations that you also noticed that played a big role in shaping community?
Of course, I would say like the Masonic family, the Masons and the Eastern Stars were major. Coming on board were the sororities and fraternities, as I mentioned. Also, there were circle clubs, and I can remember that my grandmother was a part of the Ever Ready Club, and they just did major work. We sponsored the debutante ball back in the day, and so, as I mentioned, we really supported our education. At that time, school was critical. Jones High School had been the anchor for so many over the decades, and so I was so disappointed when I was not allowed to go to Jones High School. I was the first person out of my family to go to an integrated school, and I did not want to go. I did not. But when I got there, I said, well, since I'm here, I might as well do the very best that I can and develop friendships. And though, as I mentioned, I ran for class president, I was not successful, but I did make it to the student government. My classmates elected me to serve in student government. And so that speaks volumes as well, because there were only 2 of us, African Americans, in the class. So clearly a little beyond my race.
And I know as I just said, this time we were talking not about the church. Let's talk about the church a little more. What roles, what things did the church do that grew community?
When I was very young, elementary school, junior high school, the pastor was like the elected, was like the mayor. And believe it or not, another business that really boomed back in the day was funeral homes. Because the pastor typically drove a Cadillac, and the owner of the funeral home drove a Cadillac. And so I can remember at 6 years old, I wanted to be a funeral home director. And I still have good relationship with most of our funeral home directors to this day. Some are being led by women whose parents started the funeral homes, and now they're running them, like Mitchell's Funeral Home in Sanders and Apopka. But the pastors still play a role to this day in our community. I think that we have moved to lay persons who are not ordained, who have leadership roles in the church. As I mentioned, I'm serving on the general board of the AME church is major as a layperson. But we still, so much of the ministry that occurs in our communities are spearheaded by faith-based organizations. Still to this day, the church plays a major role.
And you mentioned your great aunt and her role as a seamstress.
Yes.
What sorts of roles did women have in the community, in leadership or in business?
As I mentioned, education was key. My sister became a nurse, and nurses played a major role in our community. And at that time, most of the nurses were women. Today we have males and females that are nurses. And many of them have moved past to direct patient care to administration, making major decisions in the healthcare industry, which I think is critical. Many of them started off being nurses and have moved on and climbed the ladder, going back to med school and becoming medical doctors, or moving up the administrative chain and playing major roles in the operation of hospitals and healthcare.
We've mentioned some figures, and if not specific people, some sort of general archetypes of figures, but are there particular individuals who stick out to you as having major roles in influencing the community?
Certainly, but let me just back up. There were many women who had domestic roles, and I don't want to downplay that. They would, I can remember women would dress to catch the bus to go to work and change into their uniforms. When they would go back home, they would dress. I can remember going to the Classic, and the women would dress up with heels and gloves and hats going to the football game. So entertainment has always, and socialization has always been important and key in our communities. But there are some people who come to the mind, like the first African American to serve on the city council, Pappy Kennedy, Arthur Pappy Kennedy. We have a breakfast named after him that we celebrate Martin Luther King and Pappy Kennedy, which last month we just celebrated his contributions. Nap Ford, who was someone who played a major role in my development, served as city council member and also was my father's classmate, but went on to play a major role at the University of Central Florida as a part of their team there. There are Alice O'Braddock and Mrs. Thelma Vivian Jackson Dudley, who made sure, she was an English teacher at Jones High, who made sure that many students, and the same uncle that I mentioned, there were 4 young men that she got scholarships to go to Albany State. All 4 of them became principals and moved back not only to this area, but other areas. They did what she asked them to do, and that was make sure that you make a path for others to follow. And I think those kinds of directors played a major role in our community. And we still have some of those persons who are still making contributions, who are well in their 70s and 80s, and close to, and even some who are 90s, like I mentioned, like maybe Buckland, and some of the persons who were stalwart educators back in the day.
We've both used the word a lot, but can we talk about it a little more specifically? What does community mean to you in the context of Parramore?
It used to be where you live, but now it's so, when I would think of it, it would be where you live. But even as I really, really think about my childhood, it was also where we played. It was where we were educated. It was where we worshiped. It's where we bought, consumers, where we bought goods and services. And so it's family. It's extended family, no question. I can remember if you got in trouble and a neighbor saw you, they would chastise you, and they would tell your parents what you did, and they would chastise you as well. And so I am who I am, and let me be clear, I'm a work in progress. I'm a community contributor. I don't see myself as a community leader. But I am what I am because people took the time to invest in me. Those who I may have made more money than them, or they may have made more money than I, but just understood that our ancestors played a part and we stand on their shoulders. And it's about trying to pass the baton to the next generation. My wife and I are blessed to have a daughter, and so when I look at her generation, I can remember if you were a man, you could type, that kind of set you apart. Now, everything is so computerized. I mean, just from the time you get up, even if you want to drink a glass of water, sometimes you have to press a button to make it happen. So you want to stay relevant in the times that we live in. So I think that we have to grow in order to still be relevant.
How do you see that Parramore has changed over time?
It's kind of bittersweet. I see that that families who owned property, sometimes they're selling them. Grandchildren don't understand the significance, particularly for those who didn't live here. If you moved, if your parents moved, got a job right out of school and moved to another community, but your grandparents still stayed here, they have passed on, and many times those grandchildren are selling the property, and then new industries are coming in. And so we see with the creative village what that looks like. That used to be residential neighborhoods. And while I really do understand what transpired and why it transpired, it's still kind of bittersweet because I understand what it used to be. And I still celebrate the history that makes my generation unique for those of us who grew up and called Orlando, and still call Orlando home.
What challenges does Parramore face in the present day?
I think like almost any community, growth, you know, and what some who don't have the history see it as just as economics. And there's been growth also on the other side of that. I don't want to pretend like Parramore is the only community that's not experiencing these growth pains and spurts. Thornton Park is not what it used to be. As I mentioned, I went to Boone High School, so that was Cherokee. And I've just seen how that area across I-4 has changed as well. You know, you have City Hall on one side of I-4, but you have Dr. Phillips performing arts on the other side. So there has been growth, and the key to me is controlled growth.
What challenges do you see on the horizon for Parramore?
I think that it is important that we have places like the Wells Bill that speaks about the contributions that allowed us to get to where we are. I think those kinds of institutions are critically important so that we can pass on the history. And as we continue to grow, that we don't lose sight on whose shoulders we stand. And like with any city, there is going to be growing pains as you try to figure out what the next steps are. And that's why I think it's so important to have people around the table who think like you, who believe like you. I worked for 4 elected officials in my career in almost 40 years, and so I've seen the growth up close enough and personal. And it is critically important to me that we have leaders who buy in to having diverse conversations and contributions at the table as decisions are being made. People who have skin in the game.
We'll change topics a little bit. Your grandparents ran that store in the
Yes.
community. Can you tell us about the store?
Certainly. You could buy anything from gasoline for your stove to food for your lunch, for your kids, healthcare needs, Band-Aids, aspirins, all of those kinds of things. Treats like ice cream and sodas and vegetables. You could buy all of that. And so it was a convenience store, kind of like a 7-Eleven, but not quite that large.
In some of the other interviews, we've heard that a lack of food access is a challenge for community. The nearest major grocery store is on the other side of I-4, over by Lake Eola. With your family history of a store in that area that filled that sort of need, what are your thoughts on food access in the community?
Oh, it's real. That's the same thing in Washington Shores. You still got to drive a good 5 to 10 minutes to get to a grocery store. Richmond Heights, the same situation. You still got to drive about away. So food deserts are real, and we've got to be creative. That's why I'm saying when there are more people at the table, then I think you have a larger view of things that need to be included. And obviously, nutritional food has to be a welcome part of that equation.
What are some of the existing long-term plans that exist for the development of Parramore?
Well, it depends on who you ask. You know, I think if you ask the city mothers and fathers, they may have one vision. I think if you ask those persons who are property owners and business owners, they may have another set. And that's why I think it's so important that as we plan, that we have opportunities where we can all have come together to help in that process.
To that point of more people at the table, how do some of those plans, how do you see those aligning or not with the needs and wants of the people who live there today?
Well, I think that you will find some who would agree, you will find some who don't. Let's be clear, not everybody welcomes change. I'm a product of change. 60 years ago, let me be crystal clear, there were those in my class who did not want me to be there, period. And they tried to make life difficult for me. and not only meet others who look like me, whose experiences were similar to mine. And also, I must be honest, there were also persons from our community who did not want whites to come to our community. And what is really interesting, we have so many mixed families. The second family, the most immediate second family of this nation, Kamala Harris, has a very unique background. She's Asian and black, and she married a Jewish man who was white. But that was her family, that was her circle. And that, to me, speaks volumes of who America is. And we stand on those shoulders as we continue to evolve.
If you're willing to touch on it, you said that there are folks who made life difficult for you. Can you unpack what that means a little bit?
You know, I don't want to concentrate on the negative, but it still is part of my story. And so I would rather be known as the bridge builder, as the consensus builder, as opposed to the one who is still stuck about what didn't happen, what should have happened, or what can happen.
What initiatives and programs exist currently to support folks in Parramore?
There are programs that are run by the city, and we get some state money and some federal money to assist in that. I know there was some conversation about the A school, but there's so much positive about the A school. What I'm finding is because Parramore is becoming more and more integrated, that the A school is becoming more and more integrated. And that can be a positive thing as opposed to a negative one. We just want to make sure that no kids left behind. And sometimes, just like if you have able-bodied kids and then you have a special kid, sometimes that special kid who may have some physical limitations or some learning disabilities, you got to give them more love. You got to make more time to bring them up to snuff. And I think that is how it is with some of our communities, that we have to put the time in to invest in. And that's what our teachers did back in the day. That's what our church did back in the day, to fill that vacuum.
How can residents of Parramore get involved in planning and decision-making processes that will affect the community?
You know, I think the homeowners associations are such critical opportunities. I think in those neighborhood schools where there are PTAs and school advisory committees are welcome opportunities to do that. And again, I think that the faith-based community continues to play a major role. And what we're finding is that more of the faith-based communities are coming together. Baptists, Methodists, Church of God in Christ are coming together to provide. And in many instances, in applying for loan opportunities and grant opportunities to do programming in their neighborhoods.
How can other Orlandoans who don't live in Parramore support the community of Parramore?
You know, in schools there's always cookie sale, or you can always make contributions. And I can remember one school board member, and I won't tell the person's name, but they represented another community that was more affluent. But they volunteered after their term of service was over on the school board. They came to Jones High School and volunteered. I could remember they would get their check and they would invest it in some of the poor schools in their neighborhoods. To me, that's what it's about, when the cameras are not rolling, when the pictures are not being printed, but really, really making a difference. And we've had people all over the city who have taken on solid roles like that, who reach beyond just their family to encourage and support other families. And I know I stand on those shoulders of a number of individuals who invested in me, and I think I have a fiduciary responsibility to do the same thing. But not only the upcoming generation, but on whose shoulders we stand. I still have family at Guardian Care Nursing Home where my grandfather passed away. Matter of fact, today I celebrate his youngest son's. He died a year ago today. And I still go back to that nursing home, Guardian Care, who will serve the least of them. And I think it's those of us who make contributions that support them. And hats off to their staff and the executive director for the work that they do.
What is Parramore's legacy?
People who live there, the people who call Parramore home, the people who, and you have to understand, our school board administration building is in the heart of Parramore. And I think that the leadership from the school board chair to the superintendent understands that and values that.
What does Parramore mean to you?
Home, always. Even though I no longer live in what is designated as Parramore, Parramore will always be a part of who I am.
Is there anything else that you want to mention about Parramore that I didn't ask you
Well,
about?
I think you've been very thorough. Again, I want to say for those who are responsible for the Parramore project, we want to say thank you. You've gone way beyond what you probably signed up to do. And for those of us who continue to celebrate the history of Parramore, we want to say thank you and to your colleagues. And I want to thank Mayor Dyer. I would be remiss if I did not thank him for allowing me the opportunity to make a contribution in a city that means so much to me.